All right, well, continuing on from last week, Justin, we teased it. Justin's back. Say hello.
I'm back.
He's back. He's back. Thanks for coming back, mate. You did promise you would. But this week, we're joined by Mitch, who was last on the podcast for the Spider-Man episode. Mitch, hey.
Hello. How are we?
Now, you sort of put your hand up, mate, and said, look, if you guys are going to be doing this stuff, I want to get involved because I've got a bit to say, especially about today's topic, which we teased last week. We're going to dive into a bit of aliens in pop culture, movies, TVs, whatever you've consumed in pop culture consisting of aliens. We'll probably try and touch on a bit of it today. But Mitch, this sparked your interest a little bit. What was it about the idea of aliens and sort of conspiracies, I guess, that got you so interested?
Yeah, well, there's a bunch of conspiracies that I'm all aboard at the moment. And on top of that, I've been in the sci-fi mood at the moment when I'm watching Netflix and your other streaming services, rather.
Yeah, same.
So, yeah, would be very interested in this conversation.
I feel like a lot of people are at the moment. Everyone I speak to seems to be saying things like, actually, Justin, I've had a lot of people say to me they're watching The Expanse. Or just...
I will keep saying it. It's amazing.
Or even just going back and watching things. I had somebody tell me the other day they went and watched Alien for the first time. Now, I'll say straight off the top, I still haven't seen Alien to this day, and that's
pretty poor.
I know, it is poor, because that is a pretty big alien-based film in pop culture. You guys both obviously seen it.
Love it.
Yes, absolutely.
Is it
and
good?
Aliens and the other sequels, and then Prometheus and Alien vs Predator.
I've seen, I think, all of them except Alien vs Predator, but the best is obviously still the first. But
even with how old it is.
Yeah, absolutely. It actually hasn't. It's aged well. Like, it hasn't gone into the dump at all. Even the visual effects and everything.
I think the benefit it has is that there isn't that much in terms of like seeing the alien. I'm pretty sure the alien's in the movie for 10 minutes. But that's what makes the film so good, is because you're on the edge of your seat the whole time, just terrified. It's so suspenseful. They play it so well.
Is Alien the one with the hand that comes out of the chest? Is it? No, it's a head. It's a head. It's a head that comes out of the chest. Okay. Look, I'm gonna say it, boys, straight off the top. I haven't seen it, obviously, but I feel like the technology hasn't held up that well. From what I've seen of that scene, looks pretty robotic.
I mean, it is robotic, but it still works. It still works well, and the acting in that scene is legitimate because they weren't aware of what was going to happen either. So once this actually occurred, like, they all shat themselves.
I did hear that. Who was the director of Alien? Do you guys remember?
Ridley Scott.
Was that Ridley Scott, was it? So that was a choice by him to keep that secret from the cast?
I would assume so. I'm not actually 100%.
That's one way to go about it, because we spoke a bit last week about trying to sort of get, how do you get the best out of an actor when they don't really understand, none of us really understand space and what the hell it would actually be like to be up there, let alone when you're interacting with aliens, I guess, for lack of a better term. But I guess in that moment, a bit of shock and awe is the only thing that can really get a genuine reaction out of it.
And I think the thing that helps that as well is, you've got practical effects. So the actors around it did have something visual to look at and terrify them in person. It's not like they had to pretend that there was a CG thing bursting out.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, like a blue dot or a green dot that they've got to follow off camera.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that sort of goes into what the initial idea of talking about aliens a little bit was on the back of Justin and I talking about Interstellar. We were on that sort of topic of movies of that genre that sort of feel a bit more real, and when you sort of look at it and you consider that to be the best version and being done to the best way possible. And we sort of got onto the topic of the film Arrival. Now, that's a movie by Justin's favourite director, which is a name he loves to pronounce, which I won't even...
No, wait, I think I can do it. No, I can't do it.
Is it I don't even know if I can get it right. It's Villeneuve, is it? Villeneuve.
Because it's not Dennis, it's like Denis.
Is it not even Dennis? I thought it was at least Dennis.
No, it's not. But then I don't know how to say his last name.
Dennis Villeneuve.
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 Villeneuve or something like that.
The guy that's doing Dune. Same guy we spoke about in another episode where Justin got tongue-tied with it a little bit, but he directed Arrival, and I'll say straight off the top, right? So when Justin and I spoke about this, I walked away from... We talked about it after the podcast, and then I went away and I thought, you know what? Maybe I will watch Arrival, because I'd seen it once. And the one time I saw Arrival was at where we all used to work, Hoyts, and up in Cinema 6. And I was up... Yeah, good old days of Cinema 6. And I was there with two other mates, right? And we just had dinner, and I had a massive blow-up with my girlfriend at the time on the phone. And I was in a filthy mood. So I've gone into this movie, not really interested to be there. I'd copped a spray for being with the boys instead of my girlfriend. And I was just in a filthy mood. And I reckon, boys, since when did that come out? 2016, I think it was.
Yeah,
4 years. I've just put that movie off in a pigeonhole of bad memories and having a bad taste in my mouth about the whole thing. Went back and watched it. What a movie.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because it's like a different take on the alien genre, like going by the language and then also the time.
It's so original.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I thought watching it. It felt very, I guess, scientific. Like it felt like there was enough in the narrative to make it feel like, oh, this is probably what it would feel like if aliens did come to Earth. Like, this feels like the most realistic of... what that would look like, whether it be the way they look at it through the science and how they communicate through the... what was the language thing? It was like they had to learn a whole new language and they had to get the language specialist involved, and you don't even consider that when you watch when you think about aliens coming to Earth. You're not sitting there thinking, well, how would we communicate? It's usually just straight on the back foot of it's us against them, rather than let's try and understand why they're here.
I think one of the good, like, realistic parts of how the movie goes about it, though, is not like the talking with the aliens specifically or anything like that. It's about the different reactions between countries, because it's the same thing when we're in the situation we are now with a pandemic. It's something that no one knows how to control on their own. People think that they should be working together, but then you have some countries who are either trying to exploit it or don't trust other countries, and they cut themselves off. So it's like they get to the point where in the movie, they're all worried about the idea of the weapon because they don't know whether they've miscommunicated something. And all of the countries have a different personal view on it. And it gets to the point where they all shut off. Because two countries, that's like Russia and China, shut off their communication. And then everyone else feels like obliged to do the same. And then all of a sudden, no one's working together and you're pretty much screwing over the entire planet. And it's like, that's, what we're looking at right now. You've got countries who are all trying to be like, we need to do this together or else we're not going to get anywhere. And then you've got some countries who are like, oh, we'll do it on our own. That's fine. We don't need your help, or we don't want your help, or we don't want to help you. And it just throws the world into chaos. And that's where that movie, I think, did a really good job of kind of vilifying people and governments and stuff like that, compared to it's not humans versus the aliens, which, Independence Day and stuff like that. We don't just all work together. This movie really shows that, in this situation, we would crack under the pressure. 100%.
Absolutely. Agree.
Yeah, that was one of the strangest things I thought was just, that's when I looked up. That's how I knew it was 2016. I looked it up. I'm like, how long ago was this made? This feels incredibly relevant today. But it's funny because so many of those, I guess those movies have been like that before, where they do sort of pit countries against each other, have different approaches on how they think they should go about defeating this alien invasion. But you always sit there as the person watching it going, oh God, why are they so dumb? This is so stupid. Surely they would just work together. But now living in the world we do, we realize, oh no, incredibly accurate. Incredibly accurate.
There's a little chance that we can work together in these situations.
It was bloody sad. It was a sad realization of, oh, this was predicting what would happen even before this. It's like when we did that episode about Contagion at the start of this whole pandemic. Same thing. People sort of everyone looks after themselves rather than working together. I thought that was interesting. But the other weird thing I thought, I wanted to get your take on what you thought of the actual representation of the aliens in Arrival. They look like hands, don't they?
Well,
they look like hands like that.
Tentacles sort of creature.
What do they call them? Heptapods, because they've got 5 legs. I think that's...
Is that the scientific meaning behind that, is it?
Well, because it's like... the pod thing is like the idea that it's coming from like a squid-like creature.
Yeah.
And then the hepta, I think, is because they've got like the 5 tentacles. But I think the just the general way that they portrayed the aliens in how they communicated completely differently. They were like in some sort of different kind of atmosphere. You barely saw them, and when you did see them, they looked nothing like anything really that you could put something to other than maybe an octopus. And I think that's great because one of the worst creative problems movies have with aliens is they instantly go biased into, and I guess you can argue that it's like a creative cop out into making things look like us.
Mm.
So, whilst it's still great, you look at things like Star Wars and Star Trek, all of the aliens have humanoid features. They've got 2 legs, 2 arms, or at least they resemble something really obvious. And like for a movie like that, that's fine. But when a movie like this is focusing on really being, wow, this is like First Contact, you want to make them look as obscure as possible because that's probably what it's going to be like in reality. There's no way that like the chance that we're going to find something that looks exactly like us is so much less than finding something that looks and is made up of and runs completely different than we can even imagine. So seeing something like that is like, wow, they really just threw all of the biases out the window and were original about the whole thing.
I don't know if they were original, Justin. I personally think they look a lot like the Simpsons aliens.
I was just about to say that.
Don't you reckon? I at one point I was thinking like you. I was thinking, it's a really unique take on them. But then the more I thought about it, I'm like, kind of resembles, I can't remember what their names are in the show now, but the aliens from the Simpsons. I don't know that, and you can't say they had humanish features. They really didn't.
Right, I hadn't even considered that. But I think the general idea still applies there.
No, I think you're right. Like one of my favorite alien-based movies is Signs. Have you seen that with Mel Gibson?
Absolutely. That's probably up there with my favorite representation.
You haven't seen Justin?
No.
Oh my God, that is one of
scary.
So scary, and it's all largely as any good alien movie, I guess, really is it's based from the human point of view, and you don't see much of the aliens. And on the very few glimpses you get,
and it's all suspense. Like it's no jump scares. It's all like genuine suspense. Suspense, yeah. But like the bit where you see it on the roof of the barn, or like the house,
God.
And then at the birthday party is hands down one of the best scenes to show an alien in history.
So I first watched that movie when I was probably 12 or something. It was me and Mum home alone, and Mum still talks about to this day the only time in her life where she slept with the lights on. And she's a grown-ass woman, and but that, and the scene we always talk about is the birthday party scene. It was pretty iconic at the time when that movie came out. That movie still holds up for me. That's one of the better ones, and the whole crop circles and all that sort of thing. That shit is where I get really fascinated. It goes back to, I guess, communication and what is the meaning of symbols, and which is why Arrival's also really good. It's what do these symbols mean? I don't understand what I'm reading. Hadn't actually made the connection between the crop circles and the symbols in Arrival, but I guess, I don't know, there is like a crossover there between those two things. But I guess that sort of takes you into a little bit of conspiracy territory, though. Speaking of crop circles in Signs, what is your take on that? Because that's a bit of a trope, I guess, in movies when doing aliens is crop circles. That's where I know them from.
Well, I think at least referring to Arrival specifically and the way they do the communication there with the drawings and stuff like that and how they read and communicate back. That's the one part that I think is the least realistic in how we would go about it, part of the movie, because for one, you probably wouldn't get a linguist or whatever she is first. She wouldn't be the first one there. The first ones would be, the physicist who's Hawkeye or whatever his real name is.
Yeah.
And you would get a more likely like a biological, I don't know what their word is. It's like a linguist, but for animals. because we have people whose like job is scientifically trying to communicate with things like dolphins and other animals, trying to understand their languages and how they speak. Because if we're going to find an alien, it's going to be more like trying to understand how an ant talks rather than how to understand like a different race of humans talks.
True.
There's no starting ground on how to actually start communicating. Like,
unless there is that like possible connection that they previously existed on Earth, and
Yeah,
like
I
for
mean-
example, like hieroglyphs.
yeah,
Or
exactly.
like
There's that whole thing that they've been here before and have understood our language, but it's going to be more like, they wouldn't be writing on the whiteboard names kind of to start with, or like human. They would be drawing up maths like, what is the symbol for hydrogen? Because that's the most common element there is in the universe, and it's the same across the entire universe.
How do we know that?
But it's physics, it's the same everywhere. Like that's just known. Like there are laws in physics that we know across the universe. Like the elements are the elements. Doesn't matter where you find them, they are made up the same. And so the first thing you would go to would be like, if you are scientifically advanced enough to get here, you must have your own, periodic table. And that's somewhere to start. You'd be like, cool, this is like hydrogen. That's the most common thing in the universe. Any species at this level should understand what it is. And then you'd kind of start like that. You'd have to start somewhere based in physics and chemistry to be able to start any communication with like an alien. Because there's probably no other way that you can just start with human.
Yeah, like even like mathematics would be easy because like you could easily do like 1 + 1 = 2, and then like communicate that. Like
I think that the problem with that though is that it's like, what do you define as 1? Because if we hold a finger up, they probably would go straight over their head. That's why it has to be kind of more complicated, but much simpler. Like I know it sounds more complicated to try to explain what the hydrogen atom is, but at least everyone's view on what that is would be the same, if that makes sense.
yeah, you mean by like drawing the actual?
Not even that, just kind of, I don't know. Well, I mean, this is still me theorizing this stuff, but there's, people have talked about this, and this is like, there's this group called SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which is a huge thing that was started by like Carl Sagan and people like that. And that their whole goal is searching for extraterrestrial intelligence. And they've got like certain lines of procedure in place for if things like this happen. Like they have procedures that they have worked on with some of the brightest minds in different fields like biology, chemistry, physics, astronomy, and stuff like that, to say, if we did find something, this is how we would try to talk to them. Or if we heard, we got a radio signal from somewhere else in the universe, this is how we would go about starting to decode it. And we've used the same thing to send out messages. So we've sent out messages across the universe, and we've coded them in a specific way that should be able to be decoded by anyone, regardless of how they communicate.
So essentially what you're saying is if aliens do come here, it's going to be another case of smart people having a conversation with even smarter people, and the rest of us just hoping that someone tells us and explains to us what's going on.
Well,
Everything is good.
yeah. But if you ask anyone that's involved in that group, that's never how it's going to go, because the odds of those people being the first ones to actually get the communication is so small. Like,
Yeah, especially when they're already abducting cows and country people.
Yeah,
Oh,
in the middle of, desert in Australia, they're not going to land by a scientist.
yeah, I guess that's true. So to that point, let's take a little detour now. Let's just jump off that road and let's go off into a little bit of uneven terrain over here, and let's have a conversation about conspiracies. Now, Mitch, I want to ask you first before we go to Justin, who admittedly is far more on the side of science. So and that's good. That's what we need him for, to keep us in line a little bit. Do you reckon aliens have been here, Mitch?
Yes, 100%.
Give it to me. I want to hear.
I see. Like my main point that I would go up is like the pyramids. So like just the whole design and the way that they were built by an ancient civilization, like which we today would struggle to build. Like there's like tons, like bricks or granite stones that weighed tons, managed to stack up at an immense height, all while creating like perfectly mathematically equation with this aligned with the stars and everything like that. And then on top of that, it's not only just in Egypt. There's also ones in South America, Asia, everywhere across the world before oceanic travel was even like a major thing. Like I guess the only potential way that they'd equate to like that being non-extraterrestrial would be like human minds are similar, and that's why they create similar design. But I don't understand how like an ancient civilization could come to that. What they used mammoths to bring granite stones that are weighed a tons, especially when like the nearest mine, I think this is like in Egypt, was like hundreds of miles away. So like not only did they have to drag it that distance, they also had to build it into a pyramid.
That's like me, right? So last week I spoke about, and this is on a different scale, obviously, but this is why I can understand what you're saying, is because I, for one, find myself sitting there with the original moon landing saying, well, they didn't even have good TVs or anything back then. Like technology was so limited. You expect me to sit here and just go, yeah, no, absolutely they were on the moon for sure, without asking any questions or without raising an eyebrow of how did they pull that off? To an even greater scale, what you're saying about the pyramids, that's why that kind of, I can understand that argument too, just as much as I can any other conspiracy. That's probably the biggest thing that goes in the favor of those people that say they had to have some form of help building those pyramids, because I can't imagine doing it now. I struggle to understand how people that found Doncaster, which is a suburb not far from us, stumbled across Doncaster. And like, how did they get there from when they got off the boat? They didn't have cars. They were on, horseback and carriage or whatever, and they ended up in Doncaster. They found, like, I don't understand how life worked back this long ago, let alone how they were building pyramids.
Yeah.
Justin, what do you answer to that?
Well, I mean, I think that last point you raised is one of the really important things that we need to remember, is that it was just so different back then that we can't begin to think about how they worked mentally. In terms of like the pyramids and stuff, I mean, in terms of the similar shapes across from Egypt to South America, I mean, like that's just geometry. Like geometry is the same no matter where you are. And the shape of a pyramid is an easier structure to build than a skyscraper because of how weight and stuff like that works. The higher you go, naturally, the further out you have to get so that the whole thing is balanced. And that's why they were so big, because they needed to get high up, because their religion was that the closer you are to the sun, the closer you are to God, because it's like Ra or something like that. It's for the afterlife and everything. So they needed to get high, but in those times, the only way to get high was to go big, because, that's just the construction works. In terms of how they did it, that's a feat that's just incredible. But, last year when I was up at Machu Picchu, the kind of construction there is also incredible, because you're thinking about how high you are above sea level, which is, it's almost hard to breathe up there for a lot of people. Like it's pretty crazy. And the idea that they're walking over mountains to build this gigantic city on a mountain, it's incredible to think about. But after looking at all of the different stages and stuff like that, you can kind of start to see how it's done. Like you can see that they had these quarries on the side of other mountains around the area that were from natural like bits of the mountain collapsing, and they'd dig the stone up. You can see there's still ways that they were cutting this stone and then transporting it. And like all of that, there is enough to see that they were able to do it. You could always argue that they got the idea from aliens or something like that. Like, I mean, the whole, like Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Great movie.
The worst movie.
Come on.
It. I enjoyed
it's all right. That's not bad.
I thought it had a stupid ending. I didn't enjoy it. But I mean, like the whole like shaped skull being reminiscent of those aliens. I mean, like you can see there in South America, like we found this, we were hiking around one of the quarries and we found a little cave under a natural cave under these rocks, climbed inside, and there was, skeletons in there, remains that had probably been there for hundreds of years. And there was skulls that were pulled out. Like that's what they did. They'd stretch the back of their kid's head, when they were born because they had soft skulls. And you kind of thought, well, maybe they had that idea because they saw it from their like God in person. And so they started doing that for generations or something. But my whole thought on aliens being here before is that like there would have to be something left over. And if not, then why can't we see them now? How would they have gotten here and returned to a point where we can no longer find any trace of what they were or where they came from? And that's one of the things that's kind of like, it's being, explored. We're constantly looking for life. Like that is a huge field. And within the next 10 years, I think we're going to find plenty of it. It's not little green men or anything like that. We're going to find like microbes and things. But to say life doesn't exist in the universe, I think is a naive thing to say. Like it's just too big. There's no way that there's not incredible amounts of stuff out there. We could be our own solar system could be abundant with life. We're expecting to find stuff. Well, there's the stuff now that they talked about on Venus. There's water on Mars. They found liquid like oceans under the ice belt, under the polar ice caps. There's like all of the moons of like Saturn and Jupiter. There's plenty of spots there that could easily harbor a hell of a lot of life. Not the life that you probably expect, but there's something there. And even if we found more than one spot, like if it was not just Earth in our solar system that had some form of life living on it, and you would know for a fact that it is abundant across the universe. And that, then raises the idea of, well, there probably is other forms of life like us that can leave their Earth to the extent of, maybe there is forms that are more advanced than us that are able to kind of get here. But if they could have gotten here, there's no way that we would have even been able to perceive that they were here. If they would be so far advanced that it would just be like ants. We are ants walking around someone's kitchen. We wouldn't know that they are, spraying us from behind or something like that, or putting us on a specific path. So I disagree that there have been aliens here before, but I don't disagree that there are aliens in the universe.
But what do you say to all like the UFOs and sightings and whatnot? Like even like there are government documents from like the US that were released.
Yeah, I love all that stuff. I think it's great, and I would love for there to have been stuff. But I mean, why? There's just too many plot holes with all of it. Why is it only all of this government restricted data that all of this comes from? And why is every public sighting filmed on a Nokia brick camera?
It's not though. Like there's like Air Force footage.
Yeah,
like,
no. But then why is that's what I mean. Why is it always like the American or Russian government that finds these things?
It does seem to be.
Yeah. Well, you
put
it,
doesn't it?
Sorry. Well,
it does seem to be the case though that it's always American or sometimes Russian that you do hear. That's where the sightings happen.
You also hear things from like Australia as well. Obviously, it's just not prevalent because there's a less population and whatnot. But like you look at it this way, so the American for COVID, like the way that people reacted to just a pandemic, like shopping, doing all that stupid stuff. Like what if the government released the fact that like aliens had been on Earth and like things like that, you think that wouldn't cause panic? I reckon that it'd cause more panic than what the pandemic did.
It would change the entire way that we see the universe. It would change the way that we live. But how are they the only ones that are able to hold the information? Like that's what I think is silly, because they're like, we have cameras across the world constantly looking up. Even if you consider just the fact that there are like in every state, pretty much in Australia, in every state in the US, all over the world. This is just one example. There's a group who have these little boxes that have like 9 cameras in them that they like let people basically rent a box and they put it on their roof. So they're all over Melbourne, they're all over the world. And what they're looking up for is like asteroids and meteors that come in, because then we can trace where they come from and where they impact to pick them up and analyze them and stuff like that. But even just those are pretty much a constant eye on the sky. And they've been around for like decades, and there's only ever more and more of them being put up there. And the whole idea of them is they see something moving in the sky, they like switch and record the thing, kind of like an automatic camera. So it's like, why don't stuff like that capture them all the time if these things are around? Like, that's just one thing that's pointed up there. Think about all of the recording stuff that is constantly recording these days. That is all pointing up. And like, why is it that, you know, only one camera that is then instantly taken by the government of the United States is the only thing to have seen this thing?
Well, there's like multiple things, like two big ones. One, censorship. Two, and it could also just be like the technology that they have when coming to Earth. They are not visible by that sort of technology.
That's where the grey area comes in, though, I think, because what we can see right here is there's two people that want to believe two different things. So there's and both come from a point of, oh, I've seen the info. Like, the info is pretty compelling, which it is on both sides. I really believe in the whole. Let's be honest. If there was something that proved that there was alien life, the government wouldn't want that getting out. It was a message that was a very underlying message in one of my favourite movies, Batman v Superman. Now, one of the more compelling pieces of cinema history where the idea of if there was somebody like a Superman, right? So, for instance, that is an alien. Superman's an alien. That instantly rules out religion. Pretty much. That just rules out the God created man, essentially. I would say that would throw all of religion up in the air. That would cause mass panic.
I disagree.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Religion are notoriously good at bending things in their favor.
Yeah.
Because,
100%.
and like to what I was saying before, it's inevitable that we will find confirmation of some sort of life within the next, I think, even 10 years. So they and I think, for a lot of them at least, you know, there are a lot of religious scientists and stuff like that who, you know, the people looking out for life and stuff. So I think that they'd find a way to adjust their text to be like, you know, Earth was created on a wide scale. Maybe God had tests on other planets and stuff like that before he was happy with Earth.
You're not wrong.
Yeah, and even like the fact that we found dinosaurs' existence sort of like throughout religion, or should have thrown out religion, but like it didn't.
Yeah.
Like the whole Adam and Eve theory, just like make a put. Oh, but no, that was just a saying or like a story. It wasn't actually like taken as gospel. But like,
yeah,
I don't know.
That's true.
People need something to believe in anyway, because it gives people, I guess, hope and clarity, especially in times like this.
Well, and that's the other side of what I was going to say is the idea of hope and something to believe in. That's half. I kind of think that's half of where the alien fascination comes from with people is they want it to be real. They want there to be more than what is here on Earth. They want there to be the opportunity for, you know, to find new things, to have that hope of, you know, if things go wrong here, there is life beyond Earth and this planet. That sort of goes hand in hand with those religious hopes and beliefs of, you know, after death, there's something more.
Yeah.
A lot of our fascination, and it spews into pop culture, and, you know, there's a reason why they make so many movies based on aliens and stuff. People are fascinated with it and want to be able to believe in it. Same reason you've got superheroes that are largely aliens. You know, it all plays to people's insecurities and hopes and beliefs of what could be out there.
But that's just it. Imagine if for some possible reason we confirmed that we were the only things in the universe. How lonely that is.
Shocking.
Like, it's sad. But, you know, the odds are not in that favor. The odds are in our favor, I think, in this case. I mean, and that's why there's all of, like that, as you said, you know, religion is playing to the idea that, you know, there is something after death and stuff like that to give people hope and comfort them in the idea that, you know, maybe when you die, it is just nothing. But even in a science form, you at least, you know, are put back into the Earth, into a regrowth cycle, and you help out the planet. But if we think about it, like all of these scientists, maybe only 30 years ago were really like, let's start looking out there. We can't be the only things here, because if we are, then that's just depressing. And they came up with all of this stuff. Like there's the Fermi Paradox and the Drake equation, which are all like Just
What are they? I don't even know what they are.
Yeah, I have no idea.
so the Fermi Paradox is probably the most interesting thing because it's the idea of if there is lots of life out there, then there is like kind of two cases. You can think about it as like jumping over hurdles, but each hurdle is getting bigger. There is one hurdle that is the hardest to get over, and either that hurdle is the one that we've already passed in that getting from single-celled organisms to multi-celled organisms. So when we went from being like bacteria into little fishes, like maybe that was the biggest hurdle, and that we will find the universe is abundant with single-celled life, but it's hard to get to multi-celled life. So we won't find a lot of places that have like us on them. The other idea, which is kind of scary, is that we are yet to reach the biggest hurdle. And the other hurdle is that when a race or a species gets too intelligent, they kill themselves off. So, nuclear holocaust and stuff like that is an inevitability for 95% of intelligent species because they maybe get too power hungry or something like that. And, evident with what we've seen, that's still a possibility that you would get to that point, and then that's what would stop a lot of species from evolving. That is kind of less likely because even if that was the case, we would expect to see a lot of ancient dead civilizations out there. So, if we would probably think that we would see radio emissions from places like Earth that were beaming out maybe 1 million years ago from an old star or something like that. But if we look now, then they would all be dead. But we would still expect to hear from, the ghost of them. But, that's the kind of Fermi paradox. The Drake equation is more hopeful and less sound in that it's basically, I think it's 7 different variables. And each of these variables accounts for the possibility that life, and this whole equation together tells us how many intelligent species or worlds there are in the universe, or even in like your galaxy. So the different variables are like how many planets are around your sun, how many suns with planets around them are in a galaxy, how many of the planets that are in that solar system in each of the ones around the galaxies are in the habitable zone. So how there's that Goldilocks zone that you would have heard of in high school, which where you get liquid water. And then how many of the planets in these solar systems that are in these galaxies that are in the Goldilocks zone have some sort of life, and then how many of them have intelligent life. So it's like a compounding percentages. So it's 10, like you get 2 planets, one's in the habitable zone, 10% of those have life, or even like 0.1% have life, 0.01% have intelligent life, and then maybe 0.001 have spacefaring abilities. If you do the maths, you get a big number, which is probably not what you'd think. But you think about how big the universe is, and then all of a sudden, if you consider it universe-wide, you've got hundreds of thousands to millions of intelligent spacefaring civilizations. There's problems with that, but there's also new things that we're learning now. Like you said 30 years ago, we'd probably only expect, 1 in every 10 stars to have planets around them. These days, we see that nearly every sun in our galaxy has multiple planets around them. And a lot of them are in habitable zones. But even aside from that now, we know that there's like the moons around Saturn have temperatures that are like 23 degrees Celsius. And they're not even near the sun. Like they're warmed by a totally different means, but we didn't know that years ago. So it's like now you think, well, you don't even need to be near a sun to have, life supporting warmth on a planet. So all of a sudden, the possibilities just keep growing and growing.
You got anything you want to add there, Mitch?
No, I agree.
I think, yeah, it is hopeful, and I reckon the thing that sort of has us still at this stalemate, because as you've said, there's been plenty of discoveries lately of life on other planets and within our own. So, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, while scientists keep coming forward and saying we've found life here, we've found water here,
we've found possible life.
Well, possible, yeah, but I mean, single cells, they have, haven't they?
No.
Oh,
There's signs of. They
we
found
don't
signs
have
of it.
So what are signs of?
So there's kind of three things. There's three main things in terms of like gases, and then there's other things. But so the idea is that if you see, you've got a planet that has an atmosphere like we have ours, and in our atmosphere we have stuff like oxygen and methane, which are only really made by life processes. So there's no geological process that makes oxygen. There's no geological process really that makes like methane. So people look in atmospheres of other planets. So, easiest is to look at our own planets and say, do they have oxygen? Well, most of them no. Do they have, methane? And this is apart from looking for liquid water, because that's, another thing altogether. But we can see, the recent thing that was in the news, I think 2 weeks ago, was that they found something called phosphine in Venus's cloud decks. So in like the cloud layer of Venus, they found this gas called phosphine. And that's one of the kind of three big ones that they look for around planets' atmospheres. Because again, it's another gas that we only know is made from either like techno processes. So it's like, I think meth labs it's produced in and stuff like that.
Yep.
Or it's made from biological processes. Now, this is a relatively understudied chemical. So there's, by all means, it could be produced by something else. But we know for a fact that it is produced by biological life. So
and meth labs.
In the atmosphere of Venus.
And Heisenberg.
So either Venus has meth labs, or there could be life in the clouds of Venus. And so it's always a could. But we always like to think of life as the last resort, because you don't want to get your hopes up. That's where the media blows it out, where the media was like, they've found life on Venus. And we're like, hang on, take a step back. We found a gas in the clouds that could have been an error anyway. So there has to be more studies. But like, that's the kind of process that it takes.
I'm a firm believer that the biggest thing to blame for the issues we have with, people pushing back against, I mean, this should all be really exciting, right? What you're saying to us. We should be sitting here going, this is mind-blowing. But because of movies, because of TV, because of comic books, because of whatever we've consumed in the media growing up, unless we see a Martian walking on a planet, well, call me when that happens. Because at the moment, it's all just a little bit underwhelming compared to what we see in movies. That's where things like Martians and having human-like features, that's what I'm looking to see. That's when I hear there's life on whatever planet, and you say, whoa, hang on, don't get too ahead of yourself. I'm getting ahead of myself because of what I've seen in movies.
But what about movies like, what about Life? I think it's called Life.
Yeah, with Ryan Reynolds
Ryan Reynolds.
I haven't seen that. Was that any good? I heard really bad reviews.
Yeah, it's like
it wasn't a good movie, but it's that kind of idea that they've found a more of a like biological creature, a small-celled organism that grew and became like a monster and blah blah blah. But like it started off as they'd found like really small kind of life on this planet, and then they'd take to hitch a ride on a meteor. I can't really remember the story. It was a bad movie, but like
it's actually become like a pretty big like cult hit nowadays. Really? Like when you like scroll through Reddit and whatnot, you see a lot of posts that like give it praise, because like it sort of like brings back the whole alien sort of scenario where it's like you're stuck on a ship and like that sort of thing. So it kind of is like a copy of Alien in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Yeah, it's different.
Mitch, what do you reckon though? Like you're more in terms of where we sit. We're probably a little bit more clickbaity than what Justin's over there doing, and that's because let's face it. And Justin's the same, but you're too educated to the point of you know better than to just solely look for the entertainment value in things. I come at this with an excitement to be entertained by the stories I'm going to hear. So, anyone that listens to Rogan, the Joe Rogan podcast, you will have heard those great stories with whether it be Bob Lazar, which I told Justin the other night. I don't know, Mitch, have you seen the Bob Lazar documentary?
I've seen the Bob Lazar one, and like that seems like too too real to believe, or like to not believe.
That's what I said to Justin, but Justin reckons he put it on. He was like, the guy seemed nutty. Whereas to me, somebody that's completely removed from all that and doesn't do a whole heap of research into the whole field, I've just looked at him and gone, oh, he seems totally sane. How can
He's done podcasts with Joe Rogan, yeah?
Yeah, he has. So that's where I first came across him.
Yeah, and the one that Joe Rogan did with the pilot of the guy who saw the Tic Tacs.
Yep.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love those. I think it's fantastic, and I really want to believe it.
I know. It's the stories. It's the stories of the unexplained that really gets me going. It's when I sit there and I listen to it and I go, well, I can't give you a reason why that would have happened. So like the Tic Tac, the story of the Air Force, I think it was like a colonel or something. I don't know what he was. He was a high-ranking Air Force officer. And they were all out on this training drill, for those that don't know the story. And they were over some Mexican, was it the Gulf of Mexico or something like that? Somewhere. Some ocean somewhere. And they're doing this training drill and something appears on their radar. And it's what they describe as, like, it was just like this dot that was moving. So they went to investigate it. They fly on out there. And they describe it as looking like a Tic Tac, don't they?
Kind of looks like the ships from Alien, from Arrival.
It kind of, yeah, that's what I thought the other night when I watched it. And so they reckon they were looking at it. This guy drops down to its level and he's looking at it with his own eyes. And then it just, like, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. And then they're looking at it on their radar. And this radar footage has now since been released, I'm pretty sure. You can look it up on YouTube. You just search the Tic Tac UFO probably. And the way it moves. Now, I don't understand the science of this and how, like, when I look at it, I just see an object moving in weird circles and all different ways really quickly. But apparently, scientifically, no aircraft we know of would be able to move that way.
No,
yeah,
I don't know.
That sort of like corresponds with what like Bob Lazar talks about though, and like their like anti-gravity fields and like the way that they deal with that. Like I feel like that's the only way that they would be able to propel and move in that way.
Yeah, I watch it and I'm just like, I don't understand it. Like it looks like it looks like what someone would make in a visual effects film if they don't understand physics, because it doesn't look like it moves properly.
Yeah.
I think from memory, there's this one bit where as it's like flying forward, it's like spinning, which is like if you think about flying a jet really quickly and then turning up whilst still going straight, so not like, veering upwards, it just kind of rotates as it's moving, the plane would blow apart. Like it would blow itself into oblivion doing that. And so seeing it, that like Tic Tac do it, I was like, this is crazy. But,
well, all you need to know, based on that point you just said, all I pictured then was The Dark Knight Rises at the start when they hook onto the plane and then they lift the plane up and the wings blow off it. And so no plane would really, because, as we established last week, Chris Nolan only does very real things. So I assume that is 100% real.
They did that. They got a plane. Oh, no, that was miniatures they used, I think, in The Dark Knight Rises. But then they did in person hold that plane body up with another jet and fly that around.
Crazy. Yeah. So, yeah, that's where I get caught up in it all, because there's even, I've heard Dan Aykroyd, Ghostbusters, you know him from Coneheads, SNL, all those things. Dan Aykroyd is a massive UFO enthusiast. He is a total believer, and he reckons he's even spotted them himself before. Now, you sit there and you listen to Dan Aykroyd, and if you're a fan of him, you know that, in the 70s, big in the drugs, huge in the drugs. And so those ones are easier to discredit. He's saying that, in the 70s or 80s, whenever it was, he was in New York and he's convinced he reckons, this is where they get a bit more out there, saw a UFO floating through New York. I mean, and he still thinks that, people were looking at it out in the street, but, technology wasn't good back then, so no one captured it. I mean, whatever. They're the ones that then make it all seem a bit nutty and a bit like, well, how can you buy into this? Listen to that story. It's ridiculous. But then the stories that are out there that are far more believable, like your Bob Lazar, like your, whatever that Air Force pilot's name was, they get watered down because of it. And so then you're at this stalemate between the people that want to believe in it, the scientists that are like, come on, it's ridiculous. Go fuck yourself. You're not going to get anywhere because there's no proof either way. That's the most frustrating part. So when people from, scientists come out and say, we've found life, and then it's not somebody walking on the moon, well, it's just disappointing.
I think everyone's desensitized to it without realizing it.
In what way?
In the sense that, the news of life being anywhere in any form would be groundbreaking and would change the way people think. But people are desensitized to the fact that if that life is like microbial, then it'll be a sudden like, ooh, and that's it.
Yeah.
Like, because people, as you said, are expecting that and hoping for something more like that. It justifies UFO sightings and things like that, which I don't think people are going to get yet. But it's still not discrediting all of that. The idea that the stuff that we find in abundance is not that doesn't mean that there still isn't that. If anything, it means that you should believe more that stuff is possible, because we've at least found that life is outside of just our Earth. Like the idea that if we confirmed that life was on Venus, or like the new rover that's going to Mars in February that's landing there, like the whole idea of that rover is to look for life in like the ice caps and stuff like that. Like so many people want to find life, but I think everyone's desensitized to the idea that if it isn't what they want, as you said, it won't be nearly as special. I think it still will be special, but I think it'll blow over.
One of my favorite theories, this sort of like segues off of what you're going to say a little bit, but like the aliens, like the main one that we see today, like the grey with the big head and that visit humans, they're not actually aliens. They're just humans from the future. Because like if you follow like the human evolution, like our brains getting bigger and our jaws are getting smaller, and like the things that we need are like improving and things that we don't are like disimproving, whatever. And they're just like traveling back in time to visit us, to either whether it be to help us or to see how we became who we are and things like that, which actually gives reason as to why that life form would be visiting Earth as opposed to just like a random life form from another planet.
I think you raise an interesting point with that, because I think in terms of a lot of the stuff that I've been reading recently and like other stuff that I've listened to and watched, it's starting to look like that's going the other way, in that our next evolutionary step isn't anything biologically related. Our next evolutionary step is becoming basically robots.
Yeah, with like the microchips inside of our head.
Yeah, and I mean, the idea would be more so that like, as you know, if we move to say live on Mars, because people on Earth would be afraid of like all of the, humanity in who wants to become a robot, like there's morale problems and stuff like that. But if we had, say, colonies move to Mars, they don't care. They need it to survive. It's the next step in their survival to be like, well, to live here, we need to adapt. Let's start, putting in more robotic implants and stuff like that to help them. That's the next step. And so I think the next evolutionary main thing is just becoming less human in the biological sense. And I think that's where, whilst the idea of like growing the bigger brains and bigger heads and stuff like that kind of would make sense biologically, it doesn't look like there's more biological human evolution to be done, because the next natural step is to become more technical.
But like playing upon that though, you could say that like the reason that they got the bigger head is because like the computers inside their head has had an effect on that, or like something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to, again, that's where you and I start going like, it's a freaking movie we're writing now. It's like, oh, well, that could be a great side effect. So wait, is what you're saying though, Mitch, kind of what you're saying, your theory is
time travel, more likely.
Time travel, or that of maybe when we were put on Earth, like a long time ago, by another race, or I guess of people from another planet. Is that what you're saying? To sort of like create life on a new planet, and they would be coming back? Is that what you're trying to say? Or you're saying this is us literally time traveling? Because then we're getting into a whole different realm of
Well,
conversation.
there's a I actually just like this is sort of like completely off topic. It's more in regards to the time travel. I think there's like an Australian, whether it be a student or scientist or whatever, recently discovered the equation to non-paradoxical time travel.
Yeah, I'll tell you right off the
Is
bat.
that fact? Base bullshit?
A reading of that in my like research group last week, and it's great. It's a great paper, but it has absolutely no physical meaning. So basically, the guys that wrote it,
It's a great movie.
it's a great script. It's more of that. It's a great
Yeah.
script, but it's got nothing else to it. It's all maths. It's just pure maths. And he even says in the like conclusion that this paper has no physical grounds. It could be put to the test, like by doing a bit more physical in like intuition with it, but it's a pure maths paper. So in practice, it probably would make no sense.
But isn't that
we
what
won't,
all...
we won't know until
Yeah.
It's not even that. It's not even a like put into experimental practice. Like you still got a step of theoretical physics after theoretical mathematics that it would have to go through, and it would most likely break down. And like even that, the idea of the time travel being possible into going back to like visit our ancestors, that still is disallowed by this paper that the guy wrote. Like the way I didn't really fully understand it. It was really complicated because it's maths and I don't like maths, but it kind of breaks the whole idea of time travel in a way anyway, because it's like, you know, the grandfather paradox, where if you go back in time to kill your grandfather, you wouldn't exist. Then you can't go back in time to kill your grandfather and all of that kind of stuff. It stops that from being a possibility. But then it also kind of means that you cannot go back in time at all to where your grandfather is, which would kind of, you know, trickle down to, let's say you wanted to go back to ancient Egypt. You know, if there's lineage there, then that's kind of like, it would stop you from having that be a possibility. But in terms of the other point that Daniel said of, you know, maybe we were put here by someone, that I think still has like, even if it was just the implanting of original like bacterial life on Earth, I think is not totally discreditable, because there's something called I think it's the natural park or something theory, which is basically like there's a level of intelligence a species must get before it's able to communicate with the rest of the universe. And we are put into a national park where we can be observed, but no communication can come between us and another more intelligent species. So they can be watching us, but like all of their signals are masked to us, and all of our signals out are kind of just like, you know, just trash to them, and they can like analyze it and stuff like that, but they'll never respond back until we get to a point where they're like, hi, we've been watching you whilst you grow up, and now you are like out.
Well, maybe that actually is happening, and then that sort of disproves what you were saying earlier about it not happening, and that's why they're staying hidden. And maybe they're just slowly introducing themselves because we are becoming that intelligent.
Yeah, well, I think if there was a way to like link the things together, it would probably more be like the things that we have seen would be like rogue people, like poachers running through the national parks.
It might be though. It could, or like, for example, it could be like a different race of alien just like invading and like trying to get their own source of information.
Yeah, maybe they don't follow the universal conventions like the Geneva
like
Code.
Star Trek, like
the Geneva Convention.
They've been pulled out by someone else. I mean, like, I guess that's the middle ground I'd be happy with.
All right, deal.
All right, so let's skew this before we wrap it up. Let's skew this back to what got us talking about it. So we've just spoken about a range of what we think could be possible and why we're here and what alien life could look like, all that sort of stuff. Let's go off the movies that we've seen or any form of media that you've consumed that sort of sparked your interest in aliens. What would you want if you could take one of them as being what you would wish the representation does look like if it was to happen one day? If aliens were to come to Earth, what do you want it to look like? Which movie represents what you want it to look like?
Probably Star Trek, in my opinion.
Oh, okay.
Can I just say Star Wars so we just get the variety?
Yeah, I guess they're the
Star
most
Wars,
fun.
Yeah, the Star Wars doesn't have like, if you want it actually to be real, like Star Wars, like the lore and everything, as in like the crime and is so severe, and that the harsh reality of that sucks. Whereas like Star Trek, at least like everyone's civilized and there's like a galactic alliance and things like that. Like obviously there are evil people, but
the Star Wars kind of makes more sense though, because it would be chaos. Like just imagine trying to control all of the civilizations.
I love though that in this situation, you guys have just now reversed what your whole arguments have been for this whole time. Justin's come at things from a very practical, very like, let's just be clear cut with everything. And Mitch has gone, nah, we want chaos. We want alien invasion. And now you switch. Mitch wants an intergalactic alliance and Justin's like, nah, Star Wars chaos. What the hell just happened?
I'm biased. What can I say?
Yeah, I guess so. I reckon.
What are you going to say, Superman?
Mitch, you don't need to laugh about it. Obviously, that would be... Well, you know what? I would have said Superman. This whole time, if you ever asked me at all throughout my life, I would have said Superman, hell, maybe Green Lantern, I don't know. But now, I've seen The Boys. So now, I know that if there was...
That's maybe what it'd be like.
Yeah, if...
You don't want Superman flying around.
No, you don't want Superman because he's like friggin... what's his name? Homelander. You don't need that. That's essentially a representation of Superman, and he's evil. So if you lose control of that person, you're screwed.
And
so
it
now,
really, like, The Boys really, like, puts that whole theory behind, like, say, like, all the Superman movies where there are people in the public that are like, oh, no, like, he can't be here. Like, he could be a danger. Like, The Boys really puts that into perspective. Like, yeah, obviously we see the back of it and see that, like, he is evil. But in the reality, the public to them thinks he's like this amazing god figure, but he's committing all these insane crimes behind their back.
Well, it's all how something's presented to the people.
Yeah, exactly.
If they're presented as being a benefit to you, then people are going to be all for it. But you also see the flip side of if somebody can get that on their side, like we saw in Arrival, like people started wanting to keep the information for themselves because they're seeing it as a potential benefit for their country to maybe be able to use as a war tool or something like that. That's the flip side to it. So I don't think Superman anymore. The Boys has ruined that. I think, well, let's be honest, Arrival had the nicest end to why they're here, I guess, didn't it? It was all very positive in the end. But I still go back to Signs. I like the way they looked. They were scary as shit. I just don't want them to be that mean.
Hey, we got water. You can just chuck it on.
True, yeah, that was a weird thing in Signs. Justin, spoilers. If you hit them with water, they're screwed. So we can control them pretty easy because I think we're only getting more water, with all the glaciers melting and that sort of shit.
Otherwise, a nice representation would be Paul.
I know, we've just spoken about all this and all I do is bring up global warming and Justin goes, nah, that's where the line is. That's where the line is.
Like, a good representation would be Paul, like the Simon Pegg one. Like, at least you got a friendly, nice alien that's funny.
That's another good one. So yeah, a bit more lighthearted maybe. That's another movie I should probably go back and rewatch. That I haven't seen in a long time.
Something we didn't touch on, sorry, like that's like, I feel like we should, is like District 9. Like,
I love that movie. Yes.
Like the way, have you seen that, Daniel?
I haven't seen it. Go walk me through it.
Gosh. So like there's like an alien craft that I guess crashes. It doesn't actually crash, but like it gets stuck on Earth. And then it's like Johannesburg in like South Africa. And it sort of like is a representation of like, I guess, race and how they treat the prawns, which they call the aliens. And they just like put them all in slums and like the humans control these prawns and whatnot. You continue on, Justin.
Oh, they're just basically, they're refugees.
Yeah.
So what we end up having more control over them.
Yeah, like they're like I don't want to say apartheid because I haven't put too much thought or study into what that was like, but it's sort of like the split in like Johannesburg. Imagine like a city, and then it's just like complete slums, favela, which is just filled with like all these aliens, and they're like living in extreme poverty just because they're stuck and their shit can't go anywhere. And then
for technology and stuff like that.
Yeah, we've tried to, like, the government steals it from them. Like, one of the things is, like, the main character, which is, like, Sharlto Copley, gets infected by something of the alien, and he starts to slowly turn into one. but then they utilize him and like take advantage of him and get them to like control their alien technology, which like is advanced weaponry and things like that. But it's sort of like a reflection on what humans as a society are like, and how they treat things.
Ruining things.
Yeah, but it's like a really good movie, which
I was about to say, I think you might
should
have just
probably
sold me.
watch tonight. Like,
Yeah, and
Okay.
yeah, Shelby Copley, like he's amazing in everything.
yeah, there's also like, if you want to like sort of get a gist of the vibes of it, there's like a YouTube multiple series, like, which is called From Oats Studios, which is like the same sort of studio that made District 9. They make like little short films, and they're all got like aliens and basis of that. So like, if you watch them, they're pretty cool as well.
Speaking of YouTube, real quick, something that I do recommend as well, if you haven't seen the channel before, Kurzgesagt, I think it's German. I think it means like the theory of everything or something. But they do a lot of, they just do educational like videos that are really well made, and they're like animated. So, you know, you can watch it really quickly. They're like 5-10 minutes and they look great. But they do a lot of good. They did a really great series on stuff like the Fermi Paradox and on aliens out in space. And, you know, there's amazing videos on that they've done that I would really recommend. Like, it's a good fun watch, and they're really a lot.
Interesting. Yeah, nice.
All right. Well, before we wrap it up, let's leave it there, because we could obviously talk about this a lot. I wouldn't be surprised if we end up coming back to this at some point. Mitch, I'm going to assume District 9 is a movie you'd recommend people going away and watching if you're looking for alien-based movies?
Yeah, up there with the best ones. I guess, like, if you want to get, like, old school, you'd watch, like, Alien or Predator. Mm-hmm. But from the modern era, I'd say District 9's up there with one of the best ones. Or if you want a horror, The Fourth Kind is probably... Or is it The Fifth Kind? But I'd recommend that one.
Haven't heard of that either. Who's in that? Anyone? Or is that one of those horror genres?
It's sort of like a Blair Witch Project type film, just on aliens. So like, the way it's set out is supposed to be, it's like real, and you try and come into it with the belief that it's a real documentary sort of type.
I like that Blair Witch style, so that might get me over the line. All right, Justin?
I'm going to throw a curveball at you.
Oh, give it to me.
The Expanse.
Oh,
It still works.
You got me. Hook, line, and sinker there. I was on. I was ready for something big, and you hit me with The Expanse. All right. So Expanse is alien-based, though. I kind of thought it was just more space, astronauty.
It doesn't really start alien-focused, but there is a heavy element of that builds through the storyline.
Yep. Okay. Well, I'm going to go with what I said off the top, Signs. Mitch, you've seen it. Justin, you haven't seen it. If you haven't watched Signs... I mean, it's arguably Mel Gibson at his best. Joaquin Phoenix, you can't go wrong with Joaquin, and it is suspenseful as hell. So I like the overly dramatic movies, and obviously very imaginary to a large extent. Crop circles still get me fascinated, so that's what I'm going to go with. All right, boys, thanks for joining me to talk all things aliens in pop culture. Look, who knows where else we'll go next. This is feels like a topic we can go on. Not to mention conspiracies. Feels like there could be something there to come back to. Let you two argue again about it. All right, boys, thank you.
Thank
you.